He says, listen my friend, I will tell you about the disease of the mind. जिनसे सब लोग दुख पाते हैं. He says, the whole world suffers from time to time of this disease of the mind. When we think of the disease of the mind, in the world we live in, we have a clinical connotation. We think of someone who is mentally ill. We think of one who is mentally ill, and today in the clinical world, all of us can be diagnosed in some time or the other being mentally ill. Every one of us can be diagnosed at any moment as being mentally ill, because it doesn't mean we're crazy, by the way. No. What the connotation of mentally ill and crazy is far apart. It means that our thought process, our ability to think clearly, our emotional status, our ability to relate to the challenges of the world, that we are not mentally well fortified to accomplish these tasks. And as such, we can have a clinically defined mental condition. Not that we are crazy. Here, Sanku Swami Tulsidas is not talking about that mental condition, of the crazy condition. He said the disease of the mind मोह सकल व्याधि न कर मूला मोह सकल व्याधि न कर मूला जिनके पुनि उदय बहुला श्री राम जय राम जय जय राम श्री राम जय जय राम काम बात कब लोग काम बात कब लोग क्रोध मोह, अज्ञान, ignorance सब रोगों की जड़ा है. It says ignorance is the root of all ailments. Ignorance is the root of all illness of the mind. अज्ञान, मोह, उन व्याधियों से फिर और अनेक शूल पैदा होते हैं. He says this ignorance is the root of all of our pains and torments that happens from a mental state. Now, what is meant by ignorance? Here, agyan, not knowing, not having the knowledge. Now, today when you says, if you tell someone ignorant, meaning that they don't understand or they don't know how to read or write. That's not the ignorance we are talking about. But agyan meaning not understanding or not having the knowledge. What knowledge do you think that we're talking about? How often have you and I or you and anyone else been engaged in a conversation with someone whereby you're explaining a very, very obvious fact, and it doesn't matter how many ways you try to tell them this fact, They are ignoring every single word of what you're saying, and they're bluntly denying that what you're saying is real. Although it is very obvious to them that it is. What do you call that person who's doing that? Ignorant. Are they ignorant? They know. They understand. They're choosing to ignore what they know. Like the man at a traffic light who knows that red means to stop, but chooses to ignore it and run across. He's not ignorant. He chose to ignore his intellectual knowledge and he said, I'm going to go ahead anyway. That's not an ignorant person. That is a person who's obstinate and arrogant. There's obstinacy and arrogance. Ignorance is a child who may say, oh, I didn't know that fire will burn, until they get burned by fire. But as a child, that's expected of that. But when a grown person takes a match and lights their finger and says, ah! What do you call that? Stupidity, right? Okay, so we have stupidity, we have arrogance, and then we have not knowing. Not knowing is, I didn't know that 2 and 2 equal 4 until somebody explained to me the value of 1, add it to 1, add it to 1, add it to 1, 4 ones equals 4. But when they show me 2, I say, what's that now? That doesn't look like a 1. Until I understand 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, 7, 8 and 9. When I understand all the way to 9 and I understand the value of 0, I say, wow, now I have knowledge. Until somebody tells me I have to learn how to multiply or divide or subtract. That is not knowing. So this, what he says here, is that ignorance is the root of all ailment, is that when we don't know, is when we are truly in the most lost state. That is the illness of mind. Thus, so if you don't know, you must learn. So what is it that we need to know? We need to know how to cook food, right? So we can eat. But you notice you don't have to teach anybody how to do that. Even the person who doesn't know how to cook. When they're starving, they'll know how to boil water right away. They'll learn right away. Or they will eat everything raw. But they will know how to feed their bodies. The knowledge that we need to know is how does you and I relate to God. When we are ignorant of that, that is the illness of the mind. When we say, I do not know how I relate to God, that is illness of the mind. When I say there is no God, then there is illness of the mind. When I say God is not this and God, that's illness of the mind. We need to educate. And the more you become educated about God, the mind becomes stronger. It's healing. And the healing process of the mind is completed when we say and accept that God is within and I am a part of the divinity and I relate to God with all of my activities. Mansa karma vacha, he says, that's a healthy mind. That's a healthy mind. But an unhealthy mind is one that does not recognize the value of God in their lives. And someone will say, Panditji, you mean, so I'm going about the world, I'm doing everything, and just because I don't think of God, I have an unhealthy mind? You go figure, what do you think? If you exist in the world and don't have any moment of reconciliation that I am existing through the grace of God, then you are quote unquote ill. I wouldn't use the word sick, that takes a different connotation. You are ill. And the illness is that the mind is lacking this agyan, it doesn't have knowledge. You need to learn. You need to go and learn. You need to go where you can. Now if you're not feeling good and you have a headache, and you have a constant headache, shouldn't you go to the doctor? Yes, I agree, you should go. Shouldn't you? It's okay, Jay, I just got my message. Okay. But if you are getting this headache and you're not doing nothing about it, then something is wrong with your mind. You know, because you're not following that. You don't know, you should find out. Right? Prem Sitapati Ramachandra Bhagavan ki Jai. So then the statement is made that greed is like Now, how many people understand what is a bile? The term B-I-L-E. Huh? Bile is like a sore. It's a formation. It's like when you have a sore in your hand. Okay, but you're calling boil, but the word is B-I-L-E. Throw up, bile when you throw up? Okay. All right. Okay, well, I think, okay, greed is firm. Okay. The greed is the what you throw up. What is that called? What's the substance you throw up?
Phlegm.
Huh? Phlegm.
Phlegm.
Phlegm, okay. And anger is bile. So the act of throwing up is anger. Greed is that what comes out, okay? And he says these two things, when you're throwing up and you're bringing up the stuff, the stomach is upset, right? He says, in life itself, anger and greed have you constantly upset, and as such, you're ill. Anger and greed is the analogy of when you're throwing up constantly and bringing up all of this stuff, your stomach becomes sick, or your stomach is sick. But if you're in constant anger and full of greed, then you are sick in the mind. Not that you're mental, by the way. You could be very, very sane, but you have no peace and calm and tranquility, and as such, you're mentally ill. That is why one of the things that we are all taught, control the anger. But therein lies, when there's anger, then it's driven by some kind of greed, or something. I want, I didn't, I get, whatever. Anger is developed. Then the mind is disturbed, the mind becomes ill. Prem Sitapati Ramachandra Bhagavan ki. Good book on psychology or sociology can be written from, derived from these things. And the concept is being asked about what is the moral values of humanity. That's what we're dealing with here. The moral values that you and I must live by says we must not have anger. We must not support that anger by greed. Because when we have these two states, then we are ill. Prem Sitapati Ramachandra Bhagavan ki jai. He goes on to explain Mamata dadu kandu harshai हर्ष विषाद गरह बहुताई श्री राम जय राम जय जय राम श्री राम जय राम जय जय राम पर दुख देखी धरनी सोई छाई श्री राम जय जय रामा दूत दुस्तावन श्री राम जय जय रामा श्री राम जय जय रामा श्री राम जय रामा. We all know what's ringworm. It's a medical term. He says there are the ringworm of attachment. He says ringworms is like attachment. When it's attached to you, what happens? When you have ringworm, what is the result? There is a constant torment, itching. And he says there is a ringworm of attachment and the itch of envy. The itch of envy. You know, envy. You can't stop when you start scratching. The itch is itching, so you got to. When you envy someone, it's like that. Oh. And you, by the way, when you're scratching, who's getting hurt? You are. Now it's amazing that Sant Goswami Tulsidas, thousands of years ago, and Valmiki ji wrote this Ramcharitmanas, and the concept of relating the human physical being and what we do with ourselves to our moral values in life. That is why this body is called Kshetra. Kurukshetra is the battlefield. Kshetra means this body. And there are 5 Pandavas. And how many Kauravas? Right? So the 5 Pandavas, who do you think they represent? The 5 senses. And what is the battlefield? The body. And life is where everything happens. And he says these senses are constantly battling. And they are fighting against Kauravas. And the reality of our life is reflecting in everything in our body. Now think carefully. You know, if you're stressed out, you start to get rashes. A mental state expresses itself in a physical way. You have stress, you get rash. You scratch the rash and you are creating much more of a greater rash. And it's all because of anger, hatred, distress, whatever it is, it's coming out physically. Here Sant Goswami Tulsidas is saying that there is the ringworm of attachment. When we get to attach to anything, it's like there is that real difficult state in our physical body that it doesn't get cured easily. And then when we have envy, we're constantly, it torments us. Oh, I hate them. I can't see them. I can't stand them. And we're itching constantly. But who's getting hurt? We are. And he says, the swollen, G-O-I-T-R-E, what do you? Goiter. What is that? When your thyroid here is swollen, right? This is a medical book. Is joy and sorrow. He says that represents joy and sorrow. And he says the consumption of jealousy at the sight of others is a leprosy of wickedness. Jealousy is leprosy of the wicked. And that perverses the soul. Now we all know leprosy, what this is an illness that deforms the physical body. It says jealousy deforms the mind. And when it deforms the mind, there is perversity. When the mind is deformed, not that you are mentally ill, but the jealousy will make you an envy. Jealousy and envy and attachment is our greatest enemy, and that is the illness of the mind. And by the way, you don't need any Valium to cure this one. It is amazing the level of depth of clinical terminologies in this text. And when it was written so long ago. Now I'm not familiar with some of these terms. Only because Danesh and Jay here, they can help me with Arvind understand these terms. But I can't even relate what part of the body they're talking about. And he says the gout. He goes on to explain. Ahankara ati dukha damarua damba kapata mad manana madhuva. Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram. Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram. Krishna udara vridu ati bhari. Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram. Krishna udara vridu ati bhari. Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram. विविध ईशान करुणा कीज जारी। श्री राम जय राम जय जय राम। श्री राम जय राम जय जय राम। श्री राम जय राम जय जय राम। He says the excruciating pain of gout. The excruciating pain of gout is egoism. What an analogy. If you have never experienced gout, you wouldn't know what I'm talking about. But those who experience it will know. The excruciating pain of gout is egoism. He says, deceit, arrogance and pride, the dreadful dropsy of greed. It's like a sleepy state that comes when you're in greed. As Kabusund is explaining these to Guruji, he makes this powerful statement. Juga vidhi jwara matsar aviveka kaha lagi kaho kurogane ka.